Welcome to the Northwest Territory Review. The Northwest Territory was land that the United States gained after the Revolutionary War. It was up by the Great Lakes, and today we would consider it actually to be back east, but it was the West at that time because the United States only went as far as the Mississippi River. The Ordinance of 1785 was passed to set down the procedures for dividing this new land up into existing states or creating new ones. They hoped to do it in organized fashion so that they wouldn't have a lot of arguing and fighting over the land. The Ordinance of 1785 also described how Western lands were going to be sold. We had a very large debt from the American Revolution, and Congress really needed to raise some money. And so they decided that one way to do that would be to sell this land to settlers. The land would be divided into government units called townships. There's a picture on the right where you can see an example of what we're talking about. Each township was then divided into 36 one-square-mile sections, each containing 640 acres. Congress planned to sell each section for $640 each, or $1 an acre. Wouldn't that be great if we could buy it for that now? They were also willing to sell quarter sections or half sections, so if you couldn't afford to buy an entire section, you could go in with someone and buy a smaller piece. One section was always set aside for a public school. The revenue or the money received from selling that section went to help support a public school. It was generally section 16, so it'd be somewhere in the middle of the township, so that the kids wouldn't be out in the middle of the boonies somewhere. In 1787, 2 years later, the Northwest Ordinance was passed, which created a single Northwest Territory. It kind of grouped the whole thing together. And if you look at the map on the right, you'll see the states that eventually came out of the Northwest Territory. That was Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, and Ohio. The organization of the Northwest Territory was very important because it created this orderly plan to settle a new area. No longer are people going to be just randomly going in, building a house, and using landmarks to determine their borders. They would say, okay, from this creek to that tree with the fallen limb to the mountains to this great big boulder. And that was wonderful until the creek dried up and the tree fell down and the boulder broke. Hopefully the mountain didn't disappear. But after that, it was very difficult to identify where your actual borders were. It created a lot of disputes, especially in areas where water was an issue. If there was a shortage of water, who had control of the creek was a big difference between survival or not surviving. The Northwest Ordinance allowed Congress to appoint a governor, a secretary, and 3 judges to govern or manage the territory. They were also given a non-voting member of Congress to be elected by the territories once they had a male population of at least 5,000 people. Now, they could express their concerns, they could find out what was happening, but they did not have a vote on actual issues or laws that were being passed. Once the territory had a population of at least 60,000, then they could apply to Congress to become a state. If they were given their statehood, then they were able to have a vote in Congress. The Northwest Ordinance also required that all newly admitted states have all the same rights and privileges of any existing states. That means that just because they're new didn't mean that they didn't have just as much power when it came to voting in Congress as a state that had been one of the original 13. They had exactly the same rights and privileges as any existing state did. Something that was very unusual was the Northwest Ordinance prohibited slavery in the territory. This is the first area of the United States where it was clearly written that slavery was not allowed. And the Northwest Ordinance guaranteed that the basic rights like freedom of religion, speech, trial by jury, so forth also applied to the settlers, just like they did to anyone in any other state. And that's your review of the Northwest Territory.